Hello, and welcome to Cinema Spotlight with Jake and Reuben.
Your regular roundup of all the new films and re-releases hitting screens this week. I'm Jake.
I'm Reuben, and this week we will be discussing
Robert Eggers' sinister new take on the German expressionist classic Nosferatu,
the new adaptation of Colson Whitehead's novel, Nickel Boys.
and the luck across the new Florence Pugh and Andrew Garfield tearjerker, We Live in Time.
Now, just before we get started, please do remember to like, share, and subscribe to our channel over on YouTube, and make sure you're following us on Spotify for all the latest episode drops.
And a call out to all aspiring filmmakers. If you want to be interviewed by us on this show, please contact us at cinemaspotlightjakeandreuben@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you and hear about your films. And also a call to all independent cinemas across London and the UK. We'd also love to come and visit. So please give us a bell. From the visionary director of The Witch and the Lighthouse, Robert Eggers, comes the newest adaptation of Nosferatu. We travel to Wisborg in Germany, where new married couple Ellen and Thomas Hutter are set on a little predicament, as Thomas is sent on a journey to a far-off castle where he faces a terrifying and imposing evil. So, Reuben, I'd love to hear what your take on this film is, because I think it's going to be really interesting. I think this film's getting a lot of good press, and some people might say quite rightly, and some people might say quite wrongly. But the best thing is that it's causing a conversation. And so I think let's start our conversation. I'd love to hear what you thought.
Yes, I think that's exactly right. This is absolutely a film that is reaching perhaps a wider audience than you might necessarily expect, because it is quite a strange film. But I think that's really exciting. You know, I did watch this in a completely packed out cinema, and that was a great atmosphere. And, you know, I think there's nothing better than watching a horror film, you know, as a collective and all sort of sitting huddled and scared in the dark. Now, I am really fascinated by the original Murnau Dracula. You know, I think it's a tremendous piece of work, actually. I think it's gripping. I think it's frightening. I think it's genuinely, you know, a work of sort of cinematic alchemy, because it takes, obviously, you know, famously uncredited Bram Stoker's Dracula storyline, and it kind of turns it into this, you know, slightly more strange, you know, German expressionist marvel. And now we have Robert Eggers, you know, who, as you said in your introduction, a visionary director. I particularly loved The Northman. I think that's his best film. I think that is an absolute knockout. And I also, you know, I like The Lighthouse a lot, and I like The Witch enough. I think the ending of The Witch is great. I think it's perhaps a little bit slow, controversially for me, in its first hour. Now we come to Nosferatu, his passion project. I think once upon a time it was going to be the film he made instead of The Lighthouse. And I have to say, it's a huge, huge disappointment to me. This was one of my most anticipated films for the entirety of 2024. I was waiting for this to come out. I was very excited about the trailers. I think this is a bit of a damp squib. And to get in there early in its defense, it is brilliantly made. It is so well shot. The costumes are sumptuous. The production design is genuinely some of the best that you will see on screen this year. It looks magnificent. And the way that certain scenes are put together, you know, in terms of the, you know, the combination of the camera work with the lighting, with the production design, coupled with the performances, it creates a sort of an aura and a dark energy that is quite unique. That is unfortunately about all that I can say I liked about the film, because I loved its vibes, I loved its atmosphere, but I did not like the story at all. I thought all of the characters, and this has a great cast. We have, in the kind of central role, Nicholas Hoult as Thomas Hutter. We have Lily Rose Depp as his wife. We also have Aaron Taylor-Johnson, who, of course, was in our last episode. Of course, we also have Willem Dafoe, who I think can't put a foot wrong. But honestly, I found this film quite dull. I thought it was slow. I thought it was full of self importance and po facedness when what is happening on screen is actually very, very silly. And it seems almost embarrassed and ashamed of that. And I thought that overall, the combination of the Dracula story, which is a story that I love and which we have told, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times in the last, century and a bit that it's been around, was basically rendered very, very traditionally, very, very faithfully, and it just brings absolutely nothing new to the table. If you've seen other iterations of Dracula, this is just another one. It's just done in the style of Robert Eggers. It is Nosferatu done with a 2024 cast and with this sort of trademark attention to detail, long, tracking shots and sort of boxy aspect ratio that we're familiar with from Robert Eggers' films. But it doesn't have any characters. It doesn't have particularly good performances. I think, there are actively some bad performances in there. And it doesn't have anything remotely new to say, fundamentally, about the vampire myth. So I found it crushingly disappointing and empty. It's like the central, figure at the heart of it. It is soulless.
Well, I thought you were going to say something completely different because I fully agree with you.
Wow!
Yeah, I agree in a very different way. Well, I agree that it was very disappointing. I also agree that it was quite dull, and I also agree that in a way it was quite bland. Um, and a term that I used when I was talking to my friend who loved this film, we were sharing voice notes back and forth to see to figure out to diagnose my feelings of the film because he really loved it. Was that I said it was quite standard. It's a very modern standard horror movie. It's not interesting. I was not scared a lick. I think it uses tropes that have been labored at this point for a modern horror film. The visual imagery of Nosferatu himself is a little different from what is expected of the classic Max Schreck vision that was then reinterpreted in the Herzog version with Klaus Kinski and then has now been updated and historiified, if that's a word, by the Eggers version, who's sort of tried to make the image of Nosferatu far more historically accurate to Transylvania in that period. And I think that's probably the most interesting change that's been made, as I don't think many other changes have been made. However, I think to me, the main problem with this film is the central antagonist. I did not care for it. It was just a slab of evil and it wasn't interesting. Vampires have been around since, or the modern interpretation of a vampire has been around since the Dracula book, and more notably since the 1922 Nosferatu film, which really cements a lot of the lore. The illness to daylight, the sort of death by daylight, is a creation by Nosferatu the film. And so those iconic attributes to vampirism are so ingrained in the cinematic landscape that I don't think this brought anything new. I'm a big fan of the 70s Herzog's Nosferatu. I watched that last year for the first time, and I thought, what an interesting take. There's a very famous review that says, well, this isn't a horror film of the Herzog version. It's far more a beautiful tragedy. That Nosferatu is this tragic figure whose love and obsession with Ellen, the love for it is far more longing and far more broken and damaged, and Nosferatu is this tragic monster, this pained immortal that must feed and is in brutal agony, but is evil because that is just the demon within. To me, far more interesting, far more interesting than this deep voice monster who must take over this beautiful woman because of sex and evil. And I just don't think it's very interesting at all. I just think that you're right. There's just some kind of embarrassing performances by Craven the Hunter and slightly illegible performances by other members of the cast. Willem Dafoe is great, but I don't think he really has much of a standing in this film. I think I quite like Lily Rose Depp's performance because it felt like it was very sincere in this story, but my problem is every single cast member seemed to be in a different film. Like
Yes.
everyone's taking a different aspect. I think Skarsgård was almost in a Hammer horror movie, and Aaron Taylor Johnson was in an amateur production of My Name Is Ernest or whatever play, and was would have got bad reviews in the local paper, I think.
You have all of these great actors, and actually, most of their roles are really, really bland. I felt bad for Emma Corrin in particular because they get absolutely nothing to do. That role is there, but there's nothing on the page to make it interesting. So genuinely, you're sat there, you're watching the film, we're going, it's Emma Corrin. They're a great actor. Why on earth are they in this? Because genuinely, what is the storyline for that character? Like, it's actually, I think, a really bland and sanitized version of, a role that in other versions has been really interesting. If you look at, so last night as a kind of palate cleanser, I watched the Coppola Bram Stoker's Dracula, which, just like you were saying, is really, interested in the sort of the tragedy of Dracula. I mean, listen, Dracula and Nosferatu, they are all the same. And it's really invested in the gothic romance at the heart of the story, and at the heart of Bram Stoker's novel. And Lucy in that film is such a compelling and complicated and kind of tragic, but you kind of understand her, and there's all of this, interesting stuff about Victorian ideas about, female sexuality, which are so brilliantly tied into all of this exploration of the vampire as other and the vampire as, in some ways a kind of almost like a dark mirror image for the woman in society who is either, a Madonna or a whore. And it has so much on its mind, the Coppola film, as does the original, the original novel and the 22 Nosferatu. So I just sat there watching Robert Eggers' film, wishing that it had something to say. Genuinely, this has absolutely no reason to exist. It does not need to exist. And that shocks me and makes me sad, because I cannot believe that someone as brilliant as Robert Eggers, and he's a genius, and I'm sure he'll make amazing films in future. I cannot believe that he made something this bland. Those performances could be really interesting because they are all a bit heightened, they're all a bit kooky, they're all a bit over the top. Everyone's convulsing, everyone's doing a different mad accent. But there's nothing under the surface.
Yes, I feel as though as well that this film doesn't really push any boundaries with it. And for a film like this that has such that rich source material, of course, everyone knows the Dracula story who is even a remote fan of horror or even a bit remote fan of film, because it's been told in many different ways. They know the very fundamentals of it. And this is the Dracula story. You can't deny that. I find that some elements that are so prominent in both the Murnau and the Herzog version, the bringing of the plague and the impact that the evil has on the other people in the town, the other general public, the fact that evil is all encompassing. It's very prominent in the 22. The rats are such a prominent issue, and then even more beautifully done in the Herzogs. There's this great moment where people who have contracted the plague sit and have a last supper and say, well, we're going to die, but we're going to die on
Yep.
our own terms. And
Yep.
it's like it's the actual understanding of the weight of the evil. Eggers wanted to make this story scary again, but I don't feel fear because we're only ever seeing the panic of a small group of disjointed, mad accented, different people. And I find that I don't really believe the love between Nicholas Holt's character and Lily Rose Depp.
At all. Not at all. And crucially, I didn't believe in the sort of sexual side of it, which is death for a vampire film. If it doesn't have, a kind of, an erotic bloodline, sort of pulsing through it, I think you're doing something wrong. So sorry. Carry on.
No, but I agree. I find that he wanted to make this explicitly sexual. There is, Lily Rose Depp does uh, evoke a lot of sexuality when she's being possessed, and also when the blood is being drained, as all vampire films, blood's being drained. In every character, always has this sexual moaning and these sexual whispers as well. But I also think there is a lack of sexuality. I won't try and spoil his look because it has been kept secret but he is quite decrepit and quite and more zombie-esque than any other version of even Dracula to say. But he isn't very sexual to me. And seemingly, even though I've heard other reviewers not say this and say the opposite, but I think he's a very straight Dracula. Of course, the idea of Jonathan Harker or Thomas Hutter is that they are really the real first victim of Nosferatu or Dracula, and it has this undercurrent on this undertone of repressed homosexuality, which is what vampirism really is, because they say even Bram Stoker himself had repressed homosexuality, and it really comes through in the text. But I don't feel it at all. It just feels like an evil monster wants to kill
Yeah,
this man because he has a sexual fascination with his wife, which, on a positive note, creates a purpose for Nosferatu to move to Visborg and to pursue the plot. But the plot is so accentuated in this film. This film is only plot
yeah,
in a it really strengthens a lot of the loose ties of both the Murnau and the Herzog film, however, loses that fluidity, that beauty of expression in the Herzog one, or even the avant-garde expressionism of the Murnau. It really is soulless. I was kind of perplexed to see how basic it was. Werner Herzog said in when he was making his version that I won't do my impression. Maybe I will. That he says that Nosferatu was one of the most, if not the most important movie in German cinema, and was so important for the Renaissance era of the 70s of German filmmakers. And this film, I don't think it will inspire anything, because I think there are already far more interesting vampire films, far more interesting horror movies made about similar ideas of immortality, similar ideas of oppression and of sexuality, similar ideas of obsession of love as evil. This film is just there. It's I don't even think the horror symbology is really that interesting. I think there's one moment where Nicholas Hoult is going up to the castle that's interesting, with the carriage, the sort of passenger carriage, and the ascension up to the great castle, Orlok's castle. And then other than that, it's everything we saw in the Murnau version. The shadow is such a prominent image, but it's just, oh, I've seen it. I saw it in the trailer as well. There's a few jump scares, there's a few really horrific moments, but they're not groundbreaking. They're not terrifying. They're just shock value. It's just like, oh, here's something visually disturbing on screen. Eggers even started his career as a director, creating a play version of Nosferatu when he was younger. And yet I don't get any of that theatricality. The set design is great, the costumes are great, the monster design is very interesting, but I don't think the cinematography really pushes the boundaries, and I don't think the actual blocking pushes the boundaries of anything interesting. I think, not to spoil anything, it has a very beautiful final shot or
yeah.
final sequence of shots. But other than that, that was my one moment in the cinema where I'm like, oh, finally. And then the credits rolled. I'm like, oh, okay. But that's my deep dive. I was profoundly disappointed. I don't think people would be disappointed if they want to see a horror movie. They'd be like, oh yes, that's great. Popcorn eating horror movie. But it's not dynamic, it's not new. It's just what it is. It's Nosferatu again.
That's exactly what I think. It's Nosferatu, but with a sort of Robert Eggers style makeover. And I completely agree with you. I wasn't scared at any point. I didn't care about the characters. I know Robert Eggers has talked a lot about this as being a kind of gothic romance, but I don't think that there is any romance in this film. Like, he's talked about, the love triangle, which, in lots of other versions of this film, is very pronounced between Hutter and Ellen and Orlok. You don't get any of that because none of them are believable characters. There is, I don't think, a sexuality present in the relationship between Thomas and Ellen in a way that I think there is supposed to be. It's not like they are kind of virginal characters as they are in the Bram Stoker's Dracula. And I think that when you peer into the kind of dark heart of this film, you actually find there's absolutely nothing there. Like Orlok himself, it has a heart of ash. It's absolutely vacuous and empty, and it looks really cool. There's loads of great prosthetics. There's interesting design choices, but there's absolutely nothing there. And a waft of sunlight will obliterate it. Next up, we are going to be talking about Nickel Boys, which is based on the best-selling novel by Colson Whitehead and tells the story of a friendship between two young men at a remand school in the 1960s. Now, this film has been enormously well received. It premiered at the LFF a few months ago and was kind of given a really rapturous reception. But I'm interested to know if you agreed with that consensus, Jake. So tell me all of your thoughts about Nickel Boys.
Yeah, I watched the film yesterday and I was swept away by it. Like I really felt sucked into the world really instantaneously almost because this film does use a gimmick. It is shown in the trailer, so I will talk about it a bit. So it's not a spoiler. I'd say it uses the peep show aesthetic. It is first person between the two main characters, the two main characters of Elwood and Turner as they go through life at this reform school, this almost juvenile detention school.
Yes.
And I thought the film deals quite severely with the oppression of African Americans and other ethnic minorities, but mostly African Americans during the 60s. And I did love the film. I did. Love's a strong word for something that deals with something so harsh. And of course, this is based on a real school there's moments of severe punishment, there's moments of abuse, there's moments of trial and just the pain of racism in general and the pain of oppression. But the film deals with it so interestingly. At points, the gimmick of the back and forth between two point of views, sometimes you can get a little lost. But to be honest, most of the time I was very clued in to what was going on. I had a very strange thought about the film is that the filmmaking made it very cozy. Not the pain, not any of the very harsh stuff, but the idea that you're living in someone else's head. You're seeing what they see. You're seeing really their reaction or the reaction of other people onto you. It's like you're viewing it with your own eyes. And therefore, you are in this very ethereal space. You are living in someone else's vision. I saw some reviews that found this quite distracting, but I didn't. I was really, really locked in. And I found that there's a lot of imagery of looking up to this sort of freedom, looking up at beautiful branches, looking up at the sky, gazing across these beautifully shot sequences. And that was cozy to me. That felt like I was really like settled into it. The beautiful use of film and the lighting had this warm glow across it. It is a very harsh movie, but you are sort of that is subsided a bit by other elements that really perpetuate the relationship, which is the core central theme of the entire film. That is warm, instantly warm. And you feel like, oh, I can never see the two characters together because I've not got a traditional two shot. I've only got their view or looking in reflections, which is another main motif of this film. But it is beautifully warm, that relationship. I really connected with the characters, even though you often at times don't get to see their reaction, which is such an integral tool for filmmakers for you to connect to an actor's performance. You often just hear their voice. Many times it cuts to another person's reaction when another person is talking. And I think that's such an interesting tool. And it really worked for me. It really did put me smack central in the whole crux of it. And there's a lot of injustice and there's a lot of longing and desire. And I felt it all. I really did. I was really moved by the film. I love the use of sound design, the very limited score, the use of musical clippings, the use of just really abstract sounds and sequences and visual that sort of created this idea of a cognitive dissonance of just looking back on a time that was traumatic. It was a really, really effective use of editing. Sometimes you got a little lost, but you grounded yourself eventually. You fell into it. You got into the pattern. And really, yeah, I truly, truly adored it. I thought it deserves the noise it's getting. And I'd love to know your opinion as well.
So I think I feel very similarly to you. So I went and saw this a few nights ago. It was snowing. It was freezing cold. I got a bit lost because of the snow, and I actually missed the sort of first 7 or 8 minutes. So I actually want to go and seek this out so that I can watch the very opening scenes of it. But the thing is that as soon as I sat down in front of the film, there is a warmth to it. There's a love and a generosity of spirit that it has, which sort of, warmed me. It's, as you say, it's got this very, very, very interesting and completely, I thought, innovative, actually, the way that it is shot using these kind of first person perspectives, but intercutting between those points of view. Sometimes you'll see a scene play out twice from different characters' points of view. I actually thought that it really worked. And as you said, it has the magical effect of making you feel so intimately connected with these characters. It does a remarkable job of achieving a sense of embodiment. And that is something that it is brilliant to see a film doing that so successfully, and so audaciously in, a film that actually, in many ways is very mainstream. I think is really very exciting. And I thought it had this amazing score, this wonderful, wonderful score. As you say, it is used sparingly, but I found that it cut straight to the emotion of the scenes and helped me to feel kind of emotionally resonant with these characters. Because you mentioned there's been some criticism where some people have felt a little bit disconnected from the screen because you don't see the characters in a two shot. I felt in those sort of situations, so much of the score and the sound design was bringing me right back to the emotional heart of the story. I thought it was brilliant. I thought it was genuinely mind-blowing filmmaking, but also a really, really smart way of addressing a very, very potentially difficult subject matter, because it has that subjectivity and there is a sense of the blurring of memory and the subjectivity of memory where things maybe didn't happen exactly as they kind of play out on screen. And I think that facilitates a conversation, that facilitates almost a slight distance some of the awful and traumatic things that are happening, because the film itself is self-reflexive. I was thinking, why is this working for me in a kind of in an emotional way more than something like On Becoming a Guinea Fowl, which I found a really tough watch. It's dealing with abuse themes similarly, and to me, I felt like it was the emotional grounding of us in these characters and their bonding, their relationship, the love between these two young men, and with his grandmother as well. I thought was really touching and really moving, and anchored me in this story. I'm whittering on because I just keep remembering other bits of it that I was like, wow, that's amazing. It's all interspersed with footage of space, because we're in the space race. And you talked about that, the sort of fixation with the sky, and the freedom of the open air, and that extends into outer space. And there is just something lyrical and poetic about the images that we're putting on screen. And to go all the way back to Eisenstein, the sort of the magic of montage in telling an emotional story without necessarily having to be explicit about things. I thought it was a knockout. I thought it was an absolute knockout. I think this will definitely be on my top 10 of 2025 when the year is out. I can't imagine a world in which we have 10 films that are going to place this out. And if we do, what a ridiculously good year we'll have had.
This film, I think that this film was definitely on a top list. It was so well crafted, and the performances were all understated and brilliant and beautiful. I also thought that it deals with time in a very interesting way. That was the thing that two of the films we're talking about deal with, this idea of jumping back and forth, this idea of looking back, memory of trauma, and the admittance of trauma, the idea of coming to understand it personally from currently and later in life. And I feel like it does it so effectively, maybe more effective than a certain film we'll talk about next as well. It has a strange quality to it. It has such a unique quality that it is such a painful story. It is similar to these institutions, just have this horrible, horrible history of abuse and just how it's sort of understood at the time, how it is so present in the lives of these people. Not only do they have to deal with institutional and societal racism, but they also have to deal with the fact that they live in an unfair world where even, the main character is thrust into this world unfairly. It really amplifies the subtle feelings of the main characters, but also the grand feelings of America at the time of this change. The tide of change is coming, but it's coming too slow. Martin Luther King and his speeches are just so prominent throughout the film, yet so far. There's this beautiful moment. I don't mean to spoil anything. This beautiful moment where a character thinks he sees him and runs across to try and see Martin Luther King, but it's just it's a trick of the eye. But that really is it's a catalyst for change. It's a catalyst for the next events of the film. It's just like, this idea that people, even though they're in such an oppressed little bubble, that, there's a line which is no one cares about the Nickel boys, the boys from Nickel. No one cares. Who's going to hear from us? The typical sort of lines, no one will care. But, just the greater turning tides of history are empowering even the most oppressed. Not only are they African American, but they are practically in prison. They are young and they are in prison. They do not matter, but they aspire for greatness. And they do sort of, in freedom, they achieve their own salvation, I feel. And
Yeah.
that's what the film is about. But it's also, the accountability of those who would oppress people who are just boys, just young, just for what their skin color is, just for who they are, just for something they can't really control. They are genuinely, they're just children, but they are so impassionate. And the performances from the two leads are phenomenal. The performance from the person who plays the Nana as well, it's just phenomenal. You feel like I want that to be my grandma because there is real love. You said it, the boys have love and they're not afraid of the filmmakers are not afraid of showing it of any sort of homo sexual undertones. They just see it as plainly as it is. Two boys who love each other for because they're in this situation. They are truly bonded through trauma, but also bonded because they are friends. They become these greater friends. They do everything together. They feel together. And genuinely, I was so moved by it. And I think there's so much potential talent rising up from this. And the sinister undertones are so well done, and they feel sinister, expertly captured just from sly words and the scoring, and as you said, was so well used, and the little, the sound design, the noises, the umming and ahhings, the mythos of the sweat box of these rooms that people go in, and the nature of the guards, that you don't really know much about the guards and the teachers of the school, but you know that there's something wrong going on. Genuinely solid filmmaking, solid acting. Everything about the film was incredible. And it's a long film. That's the thing I want to say. It's like 2.5 hours, but I could have sat in it for longer. I could have kept watching. I could have kept being in these characters' lives, seeing where they went, seeing how they were as younger people. And I'm so impressed. As a filmmaker, you're right. The boundaries have been pushed, and now people need to call to that. They have to match that now. They have to rise up to this level. Now we end on the Florence Pugh, Andrew Garfield led romantic epic that is We Live in Time. This is an abstracted view at romantic vignettes across the lives of Almut and Tobias as we see through different moments scattered in different orders of their blossoming love and the trials and tribulations that they face together. Now, Reuben, I feel an energy coming from you that's very, very positive about this film, and I'm sure we're going to have a pretty decent discussion about it. So let's go ahead. Let's hear what you have to say.
Yes, so I completely love this film. I absolutely adore it. I saw it the day after Nosferatu, and I spent all of Nosferatu thinking, on a technical level, this is really impressive, but there's no soul, there's no characters, I don't feel anything. And We Live in Time was such a balm. It was such an antidote to that because I felt everything. I cannot think of the last time I was so swept up in a in a relationship on screen. The romance of this just bundled me up and took me away. I was desperately, head over heels, giddily in love with Almut and Tobias. I love the performances by Florence Pugh and Andrew Garfield. I mean, I think they're both astonishingly great actors and so charming. Andrew Garfield in particular, I just the second that I see him, I'm feeling something. You know, he's just one of the great empathetic kind of actors of our age, and I cried, I would say, from about 90 seconds in until about 5 minutes after. Like I genuinely was so emotional for the entire runtime, and that's never happened to me before. It wasn't that it was sad. I went into this really worried because I thought this is just going to be a misery fest. You know, it's no spoiler to say we know that there is a plot line about Florence Pugh's character having ovarian cancer. And I thought, okay, this is going to make me just really sad. It's just going to be a kind of a weepy and potentially quite an exploitative weepy at that. But I didn't feel that because there was such warmth and joy and humour to the characters. I laughed all the way through. And I just was so engaged by the filmmaking. You know, I mean, I actually think that we don't necessarily need the non-linear structure. I think that it works really well to avoid it getting too sad because it means that while one storyline is at a kind of an emotional high, another can be at more of an emotional low, and so it's never too devastating. But I just felt healed by it. I felt like it broke me in two, but it put me back together again. And I found it genuinely, and this is, I don't say this lightly, I found it genuinely like life affirming. I found it so moving and joyous and a celebration of the everyday, the mundanity in a way that I thought was just exceptionally beautiful. I've read some reviews, and you know the criticisms that it makes. I think are quite valid. Like they're such an unbelievably posh and rich couple. You know, like these are not relatable characters at all. Yeah, he works at Weetabix. She's a wildly successful chef, but I just completely bought into them, bought into their love, bought into their lives. And I love the performance of the chef who works with Florence Pugh's character at her restaurant. All of the pieces worked so well. And I think that the fact that I didn't really notice the filmmaking is a testament to how brilliant the characters were. Because unlike Nosferatu, where all I could see was, oh, this is technically very good, that didn't pass my mind for a second in We Live in Time because I was so unbelievably emotionally invested in the story. So I loved it. I would be shocked if this is also not on my best of 2025 list.
Well, that's very emphatic. Like, I did not hate this film. I think I thought this film was very charming. I think that's what we can say to it. And I think you're right that the filmmaking made the very heavy topic of cancer and the just the pain that a lot of families have to go through, that it sort of really balanced it. It did feel like a really balanced movie. When you'd get a clip of them going through something truly horrific, you'd go back and see the beginnings of their relationship. What I really liked about the film, I did enjoy both the main central performances. I thought they were stellar, as expected. These actors have cemented themselves in the Hollywood landscape quite rightly as a British talent as well. It's really, really great to see just how strong they are. And you can see in interviews as well that their chemistry is so palpable that, you know, it is really refreshing to see such an understandable love story, something that isn't melodramatic, that even when the moments of melodrama come in, they're treated like human beings might. They get called out. You're like, well, stop being such an idiot. Just, you know, this is just life, you know, it's just us. It feels very normal in the best possible way. I really did enjoy the time jumping aspect of the film. I thought it was refreshing for a love drama that you can repiece this film in order and it will probably work equally as well, as you said. I think maybe the biggest gripe I have with the film, I don't think it's bad at all. I think everything is functionally working. I think maybe there's a bit of heft missing from certain parts of it that maybe the time jumping aspect does take away from. Like if you want that big emotional climax, it does come, but it comes at different moments. So you have to sort of, as you say, you get a bit of an up and down motion, but it's not jarring. It doesn't feel like whiplash. it is very well placed. It's just you don't get that consistent climax. You get fragments, snippets. My biggest gripe is that after Andrew Garfield gets hit by a car, his hair is the best hair I've ever seen.
It is. Honestly, I'm so glad you said that because I watched this whole film going, Andrew, what do you do to your hair? Oh my God, it's luscious.
I think I've had days where I think I've looked the best I've ever looked, and my hair hasn't looked as good as his was hit by a car. Um, but I think it works. I do believe that you made a very good point, that the one thing that I did disconnect with was that I am, economically so far removed from these two, and they have such a lovely home and such nice flats, and they don't have any trouble economically. But I mean, I guess a nice or the sort of thing that can bring you back from that, the upper class people, is that they both suffer from cancer, which affects everyone. The biggest evil, one of the biggest evils of our of all life, of every human being, is the possibility of cancer. And so it's dealt with really well. And I also really love the fact that even though there are moments of misunderstanding, there are moments of kept secrets, and there are moments of high argumentative moments between them, as is common in dramas, romantic dramas. However, what I really love is that love persists. These people are meant to be together. It feels like there is destiny bringing them together, even if life goes a certain way, even if it's not eternal, the love on the earth. There are moments where they are supposed to be together. All the decisions made are, they're communicated. They are discussed in very healthy ways. There are moments where they act like idiots, but they come back and they say, we acted like idiots. Let's talk about it. It's a very refreshing cinematic relationship, because often in great love stories, even some of my favorite rom-coms or romantic dramas, you would never want to be in that relationship because it's really toxic, or you don't really understand it because it's just for cinema. It's like even the great ones, like Four Weddings and a Funeral, Notting Hill. It's like those relationships wouldn't work in real life. This one really does. They seem to fit together, and it feels like something pulls them together. There's even moments where they feel like they want to separate, but they're always brought back
Yeah.
because they decide together. And there's some brilliant sequences. I don't want to spoil.
No, but I agree. There are scenes in it that I have not been able to sort of stop replaying because they were so brilliantly done. I think this has one of the most perfect final scenes of any film I've seen in a long time. The last 2 minutes of this film just wonderful, and they're funny and they're weird and it's great. It's fantastic. I've never cried at someone eating a mustard and lemon gel before. But there is a sequence in this film where, like, Andrew Garfield is trying the food, right, prepared at the restaurant by Florence Pugh, and weirdly, I found it very moving. Like, I think that it is perfectly pitched all the way through, where you feel this coziness, like there is just such a glow to the film and a magnetism to the characters, and it does that completely. For me, this is what cinema is for. It is for introducing you to characters and experiences and emotions that perhaps you haven't you haven't had in real life. And I just believed completely in the characters, and it felt like I was a part of their world and I was a part of their love. It's so simple as a film, when you kind of look at it afterwards, it's a really, really straightforward story, but it is just, I think, executed so beautifully. And as you say, there are just sequences in it that sing, and so much of that is often about the performances, because I do think they're phenomenally charming actors, as you mentioned. But just the combination of image and sound and music. This has a really lovely soundtrack that I'll definitely be listening to. It just comes together in this wonderful, almost like a kaleidoscope, where you're flitting between images and colors and feelings in this wonderful tapestry that is life.
I really agree. I think you can go into it and feel very moved, like you say, or you can just enjoy the relationship. Like I didn't feel as emotionally affected by it as you did, in the sense that but I did feel connected to it. But I don't think it was ineffective. I think everything you're saying, Ruben, is correct. It does all that stuff, but it just might move people in a different way. I would recommend it. I would recommend. I'd give it a good pass, but again, there's something that is missing for me, but it's quite hard to pinpoint. Like I felt that Nickel Boys did that sort of time jumping element maybe a little more effectively, a little more stylistically in the filmmaking sense. But this one, as you said, it wasn't. I didn't feel confused. It wasn't complicated. It's very simple. But I think some people might go into this thinking, "Oh, I'm wanting to see one of the most groundbreaking love affairs I'll ever put to cinema, ever put to screen." I don't think you're going to get that, but you are going to get this really neat, this really believable story of two wealthy people in love. And, you know, if you want to see these great actors be great, they are great in it. And so, yes, there's something missing for me, but I would recommend it. I'd really say you could put it on and actually not be too. I mean, some people might be crying all the way through, like you, sir, but some people might just enjoy it for what it is. Effortlessly charming. Because, of course, the time is scattered, the callbacks to moments that you've seen and moments that you haven't seen yet, you know, the call forwards even, are really greatly done. It's really nice to actually see a full story of a relationship, but in a really different package.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And to kind of round off, I was really put in mind of that wonderful interview that Andrew Garfield did several years ago when he was talking about the recent death of his mum. Because this is a film, in many ways, about grief, but, and I think this is why the film made me think of this interview that he gave. He talked, and I recommend if you haven't seen this that you search it out online. He talked a lot about what the grief that he felt for his mum meant. And he said, I hope that this grief that I'm feeling stays with me because it's all of the unexpressed love that I had for her. And we never get enough time with anybody in our lives. It doesn't matter how long you live, it will never be long enough. And grief and sadness and the pain is all of that love within you. And, you know, that love endures. And I think that actually, that's exactly what this film is about. Because it is sad, it is about grief, but that grief is actually love. And I just think that is gorgeous. I think it's a gorgeous film with such a kind, good heart. And it might make you cry, but they are tears of love and they are tears of life. And I think that is, in its own quiet way, very, very profound.
So it's lovely to be back with Cinema Spotlight. And of course, Ruben, I'd love to ask you what your pick of the week is.
Yes, well, it's a tricky one because I loved Nickel Boys and I loved We Live in Time, but I think I have to go with my heart and I have to say We Live in Time is my film of the week. I recommend it to everyone. I genuinely think it's a life affirming film and even if you know even if you don't love it as much as I do, you will still have a perfectly good and fun and heartwarming time at the cinema. How about you?
So yes, I completely agree with you that We Live in Time is such a beautiful little story, very, very neatly done, and you're going to have a great time at the cinema, irregardless. You know, you might not feel as strongly as you do, but you're definitely going to have a good time. There's nothing bad about that film at all. However, my pick of the week definitely is Nickel Boys, and by quite a large margin. I feel that it's so innovative. The performances are really, really beautiful. And I just feel like it's a necessary film for the state of filmmaking, for the state of the world. Obviously, very heavy topics. Again, go in understanding that it deals with very serious historical truths and just societal issues that are obviously still prevalent today. But it's such a necessary piece of work and is so different. And I was so enraptured by it. So yeah, absolutely, Nickel Boys, definitely go see it.
And that is it for this week on Cinema Spotlight. Thank you so much for watching. We have loved having you.
Next week, we'll be looking at A Real Pain, Baby Girl, Maria, and the 30th anniversary of Seven.
Maybe this time we'll find out what's in the box.
Yeah, maybe this time. Thank you again, everyone. Thank you. And thank you, Reuben.
Thank you so much. Have a lovely day, and we'll see you next week.